So say I've just told you the timeline of life story, the coming of life on Earth story. I would next bring the children to see the timeline of life. And I know you can't really see it very well here, so I'm just going to give a very sort of brief overview, just in order to bridge to the next story, so that when I tell the coming of human being story, you know what the children have experienced already. So basically, I will remind them of the first great stories first, as a review. Do you remember when I told you the first great story about the coming of the universe and the formation of the planets and the dance of the elements and how our beautiful Earth was formed with no life for so long? And it was covered in volcanoes, and then it started to rain and rain and rain, and the oceans were filling up. Well, after that, we talked a little bit about how life came to Earth to balance everything out. And we talked about how there were some interesting creatures that we found the shells of. And so the very first part, I would actually roll it this way and then sort of unroll it as I talk, but it was rolled this way. So anyway, I'm going to switch up and do that a little bit. So the very first part, the Cambrian explosion, is the first panel of the story of life, the timeline of life. So I would point out, life looked really interesting at first when it started to fill up the oceans. It didn't look like things we recognize today with eyes and ears and nose and mouth or tails or even fins. We found a lot of these interesting trilobite fossils, and they were sort of filling up the oceans and changing, and they were almost like they were like the dinosaurs of their time. They were very common. There were little teeny tiny plants floating around, and even jellyfish and worms and all kinds of really interesting creatures. But there was no life on land at all, and definitely no people around to see it. And over time, the ocean kept filling with more interesting things, and the Earth would change, and things would happen, and life would change. So we see some different kinds of creatures here, some seaweed starting to form, sand dollars coming into the picture, crinoids, which we found some very interesting fossils I have in the classroom I can show you, and the first jawless fish finally came into being. And over time, life kept changing, and finally, the ocean started to fill with different kinds of fish. And I'll just talk a little bit about fish and the fern and the first sort of land plants coming into play, the first amphibian, the appearance of insects, kind of bring that up, and then go into the next section, just talk about how insects were really, really large for a while, and this, I'll talk about the dragonfly, how it was had a 2.5-foot wingspan, and point out just some of these creatures. And we still hadn't really most life was on the ocean or in the ocean or on the shores, until finally these little amphibians started to kind of branch out, and we finally had the first reptiles. Earth kept changing, and we get some reptiles getting bigger and bigger and bigger, because they're the main thing that's living on the land, and they don't have a lot of competition. And you're getting big plants they can eat, and they start flying, they start filling the oceans. All kinds of interesting dinosaurs come about. You've probably heard of the Jurassic period before. And I'll point out some of that, and then I'll keep going, point out that all this time has passed and without any human beings on Earth, and only now near the end of the timeline do we see things like butterflies and plants with flowers, which means there was no fruit for all of this time. So if we had been around, we wouldn't have had a lot to eat. So we see the first early mammals represented here, and we could talk about how the dinosaurs went extinct, and some of them became birds, and that left room on the land for the mammals to not run around hiding in fear anymore. They could sort of spread out and get bigger and take over, and life kept changing, and finally we have a human being at the very end. So all this life lived on Earth before, and the Earth changed many, many times before there was ever a human being on it. And so I have another timeline, a blank one, that I usually get out after that and show them the one little pouch. Each pouch has a panel of animals and labels, and so they can get out some of the animals and creatures and look at them and sort of follow some of the lines and notice how the continents changed over time. We have little maps at the bottom that show you know, the continental drift that led to different things, and so it matches the puzzle maps, the colors of the continent, so that they can kind of recognize the pink South America and the orange North America from the puzzle maps on this and how they shifted. So anyway, that was an overview, you know, pretty rough, rusty, but I just want to give you an idea of how the great stories work and the lessons that sort of come between the key lessons. So the next one is the coming of human beings.